This is an impersonation of Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes.
It looks like Secretary of State Adrian Fontes. It sure sounds like him, but it's not him. Why our election officials say they're learning to trust no one heading into November. Can the legislature solve our state's housing crisis? We speak with one Valley mayor. And will voters get the final say on border security? Our panel weighs in now on Politics Unplugged.
And good evening, I'm political editor Dennis Welch. This is Politics Unplugged. Experts say artificial intelligence could have a major impact in this election, with people using fake audio or video to try to affect the vote or even mislead election officials. That's a big concern for my first guest, Secretary of State Adrian Fontes. I want to thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And we did play part of that video that you put together as part of a training exercise with election officials. I want to play a little bit more to show just how effective and deceiving some of these AI videos can be. Let's play a clip right now.
Our goal is to make sure folks understand the capabilities of current deepfake technology and the dangers it poses to the public. The real Adrian Fontes is fluent in English and Spanish, but AI-generated content using his likeness has no such limitations. Let's try talking in German. Damit ein böswilliger Angreifer Inhalte für ihn generieren kann, müssen weder Sie noch Ihr Ziel eine Sprache sprechen können.
That is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
So take us through some of this. What was this training exercise? Who was there? What were you trying to show them?
So first and foremost, think of the notion of going into a space and you don't know at all what to expect. You don't know at all what's going to be coming at you. The reason that we're using these methods and techniques in our training of elections officials, in our training of the media, which we did very recently, or in our training of law enforcement, is that so they'll be able to see and hear and feel what it is to see something like that. It won't be an unknown. And when we do see it, if we do, we'll be better prepared for it. We as election administrators have to be prepared for anything. Maybe a truck crashes outside one of our polling places, blocking the intersection. A power outage here, a relocation there because of an eviction overnight from the people we're leasing from. Some of these things have happened. We got to be ready for it. This is a good example of something that's a little bit new. It's not a new bad thing. It's just an amplifier for the lies and misinformation that we've already seen. So we got to know what it looks like.
Yeah. So how could this be used, particularly to target election officials?
Well, it could be used to target not just election officials. It could be used to target voters themselves. Let's look at what happened in New Hampshire very recently. A voice fake of the president was actually telling voters to save their vote in that primary for November, really kind of suppressing the vote using the president's voice himself. And it was a pretty convincing recording. So that is one example. Another example is, let's say an artificial intelligence sets up, or those tools help to set up a fake website where, bad results will be coming in, confusing folks, confusing the voters, confusing members of the media. These things can be spread very quickly through social media, through these technologies and fake accounts that can be set up. So we've got all kinds of different ways that this could be used. And if we are ignorant to it, if we don't pay attention to it, and we just kind of cover our eyes and hope for the best, we're not preparing Arizona to deliver for its voters, and that's why we're doing this.
So what's the reception been from these election officials that you've been going around and showing these videos to, taking them through these training sessions and whatnot? Read one quote in I believe the Washington Post. There was an election official said that they're learning to, quote, trust no one.
Well, sure. And, when you first see something like this and you've never seen it before, that's going to be a natural reaction. Wow, this is scary. I don't know enough about it. And so what we're doing is we started introducing our senior elections officials to this back in December. Slowly but surely, they're seeing more and more of it. They're understanding how to deal with it a little bit better. And by the time we get to November, it won't be a new thing for them. Now, it might be a new thing for a lot of the folks who are actually voting. But you want folks who are running your elections to understand not just that they have to do the fundamentals and get the election itself done, but all of these extra things that might get tossed at them, and at the very least be familiar with what they look like and sound like, and how to deal with them. And these are the things we're training into right now, again, so that we can deliver for Arizona's voters.
And so what do you tell these folks to look for? I mean, obviously, because it's something I think our viewers will want to incorporate too, as they're trying to sift through all this information and weed out what may be misinformation versus real information. What are we looking at? Because I know after I was told, after obviously very, very early on in that video, you say this is a deepfake, this is not really me. And after you know that, and having interviewed you and known you, you can tell a little bit too robotic for Mr. Fontes. You know, maybe the hand movements were a little bit weird. But if somebody doesn't know you, or somebody just looking, you know, at a 10-second clip, what kind of things are you telling people to look for?
Well, first and foremost, we're asking folks to only go to their trusted sources of information, to their elections officials, the Secretary of State's office, and usually online is where people look. Go to the .gov websites, because only official government entities can use that. Now, we're not asking you to go there to decide who to vote for, but when it comes to the time and the place and the manner of your voting, the basic rules, these are the folks that you want to pay attention to. These are the folks that are going to tell you the polls are still open. You know, if somebody says, oh, the polls are shutting down because of this, or there's some other thing that wants to impact voters, go to those .gov websites, trusted sources. One of the other things that we're doing right now, and we haven't got everything worked out yet, but we're working with a major company that's going to help us figure out ways to be able to sort of watermark the stuff that we put out, so that members of the media like you, if you see something that's a little weird, you'll be able to go check really fast to make sure that what you saw was either real or not, verifying that sort of thing. And we haven't figured out the details yet, but we're working on it.
I was going to say,
right
is
now.
that something that could be in place by the time the election rolls around in November, or the primary election, which is coming up a lot faster than people, I think, realize at this point? We're 60 days away from early ballots going out in that primary.
We're hoping to make an announcement before the end of June. Within the current fiscal year. But again, there's a lot of stuff that we've got to work out with our legal folks, and just to make sure that we've got this thing down right. But at the end of the day, we're doing everything we can, anticipating some of the problems that we might face, that voters might face, that the media might face, because we're all in this together, and we've all got to do our part to make sure that we're protecting our democracy for everyone.
And that seems to be the big challenge. This technology is advancing and getting better so quickly. We had Hank Stevenson from the Arizona Agenda on a couple months back. We talked a little bit about the pace of this technology. Because if people remember, if you go back a few years, there was that famous deep fake or famous fake video of Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And it was really terrible. It was obvious, if you know, that this was a fake video. But the technologies are getting quicker, are getting better so much faster. How much of a challenge is this posing?
Well, it's a real challenge, and you mentioned the advancement of this technology. That deepfake of Barack Obama from years ago took about a week or so to render. Several computer scientists and lots of computing power. Right now, the one that you just played of me speaking pretty fluent German and sounding a lot like me, they could have rendered that in about 2.5 minutes on current technology that's available online. So, you know, we're not really pulling ourselves away from the fundamentals of running elections. What we're doing is kind of adding on some of these extra nodes of awareness for our elections officials because of the new technology. We're going to get the basics right. That's what we're focused on. But these other pieces we've got to be aware of. We've got to understand how they work, and we've got to understand how to react to them so that we can make sure that our voters have the best experience they can, that they don't get fooled by some of this stuff. And so really what we're doing is helping our elections officials so that we can help our voters at the end of the day. They're the ones that really matter to us, regardless of who they're voting for. We want all eligible Arizona voters to be confident in our systems.
And to get that right information, you know, and all that. So I want to thank you very much for stopping by here. I know you've been pretty busy with all of this and more. And still ahead, how are Valley cities going to create more affordable housing for residents? I'm joined by the mayor of Tempe to talk about that when Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. The legislature is taking up a number of bills to try to tackle the shortage of affordable housing in Arizona. So what can they do? that will make the real difference. And here to talk about that is Tempe Mayor Corey Woods. I want to thank you very much for being here. And Tempe, for a long time, has really been kind of dealing with this. You've been a landlocked city for quite a while. The legislature has moved through a few bills this past week dealing with short-term rentals or casitas and things like that. Are you liking what you're seeing coming out of the legislature at this point?
I'm liking some of the progress I'm seeing. As an example, Senator Ana Hernandez had a really good amendment just this past week that when it comes to ADUs or casitas, requires the main home to be owner occupied before actually constructing one. And I think that's a very, very good step in the right direction and a great amendment that the senator made. The only issue that some of us still have regarding this piece of legislation is trying to allow cities and towns to prevent them from being used as short-term rentals.
Because you and Mayor Ortega from Scottsdale are in unison on that one, because you took out a pretty, fiery, opinion piece taking on that piece of legislation.
Absolutely. I mean, the city of Tempe right now for the last few months has actually been engaging with our own ADU ordinance. We actually have had one since 2018 or 2019, but we felt that it was time to update that ordinance. And that's one of the things that we've talked to our residents about is we're trying to find ways to increase housing supply and housing options, also to increase housing affordability. And what we don't want is to create another revenue stream for corporations. We want to find a way to create more multi-generational housing options for the 26-year-old who's living in their parents' home, but because of higher rents or higher mortgages is not able to move out, for them to still be able to live in a casita or ADU and live on property. My father will be 85 years old next month. And if I could have the ability to have a casita in the backyard and have him live there so we can keep our family together and I can keep an eye on him, I think that's what's actually intended by this. But I think what we're asking the legislature to do is just allow cities and towns to have the flexibility that if we would like to ban having them used as short-term rentals, to give us the authority to do that to meet the needs of our residents.
Let's talk a little bit about the casita stuff here. That might be good for someone in your situation. You may have the means to go ahead and purchase and build a casita on your property there, but how is that really going to affect the larger problem of affordable housing or even attainable housing here in Arizona? Because, this has been tried in other places. I remember looking at San Diego had created this casita ordinance. And a few years after that had passed, they had only received, there was only permits for, 300 casitas. That wouldn't make a dent in the housing issue here in Arizona, correct?
Right. I think, though, the casita or ADU legislation is really about, it's one additional tool in the toolbox. Not one of these things on their own is going to solve the whole issue when it comes to housing affordability or lack of housing supply, but it's something else that we can use. As an example, we're a strong proponent of adding additional missing middle housing to allow the construction of duplexes and triplexes and townhomes. We've had real challenges for first-time home buyers where a lot of times corporations have come in and bought up all of the homes that would have previously been considered starter homes. And so I'm really strongly in favor of not just having to build the traditional single-family neighborhood, but allowing these duplexes and triplexes and townhomes and patio homes to be constructed to provide other options. So the ADU piece is another thing I think we can create to create more housing supply and more housing affordability by addressing the supply issue, but it's definitely not meant to be a catch-all. We have to do all of those things if we want to be serious about our housing crisis.
I was going to say, are you concerned at all that the legislature is stepping onto your authority as a local city to, look after and govern your city, your part of the valley, with legislation like this?
I'm not personally concerned. I mean, my perspective is, I first became a city council member back in July of 2008. And I will tell you, it was sort of the third rail of politics at that point in time to talk about creating more affordable or attainable housing options. The fact of the matter is this has now become a bipartisan issue where both Democrats and Republicans are talking about ways to address housing affordability and how to address housing supply. We live in Maricopa County, the fastest growing county in the entire country. Approximately, according to the Maricopa Association of Governments, 156 people move here each and every day. So we really have to keep up with our housing supply needs. So my perspective is we might have disagreements at times on policy or about matters of what something looks like or different amendments here and there. But the fact that we've got both parties having this conversation down at the Capitol, a governor who's very pro-housing, and city councils who want to tackle this issue, that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, though, you're talking about nibbling around the edge, you're talking about casitas, middle housing and whatnot. This isn't going to be an issue that's going to be solved anytime quick, is it?
No, I think this is going to take a prolonged and sustained effort to really address the housing issues we have throughout Maricopa County and the state of Arizona. I mean, as an example, the city of Tempe just took a position yesterday wanting to legalize inclusionary zoning, which is the practice of actually finding ways to say, we will grant someone a zoning change to build, let's say, a new multifamily unit, but 10, 15, or 20% of those units need to be set aside to be affordable either for a 20 or 30-year term or perhaps in perpetuity. We are the only state in the country that doesn't have access to a tool called tax increment financing, or folks talk about TIF. It's a proven tool to revitalize blighted neighborhoods that have been frankly neglected for years, but also to create new attainable housing opportunities. So I think we also need to start having conversations, all 91 cities and towns and the state capitol, about how we can legalize those tools that have been very effective nationally at creating more housing and creating more housing affordability.
What's the next step? What would you, as Tempe mayor, what do you think needs to be done? What would help be the biggest impact to your city beyond what's on the table right now, beyond what's moving through the legislature? We're talking about the middle housing stuff, the casita stuff. What more do you want to see and could make a bigger impact, maybe a faster impact?
I think the biggest, some of those things a couple have already been signed. There was a bill signed earlier this session by the governor that actually speeds up approvals when it comes to permitting. Basically, there's a 180-day limit, and we have to make the decision at a local level on zoning. I think doing things like that will help to get projects and more housing to the market even faster, and I'm a strong proponent of that. But I really think it's doing all of those things. We need to continue to work with our legislature on finding ways to legalize inclusionary zoning, tax increment financing, but also to find ways to create more accessory dwelling units and missing middle housing. I think adaptive reuse, the ability to convert office buildings into residential. The office market has slowed tremendously post-COVID-19, and we are finding ourselves with additional office buildings where people may never return to the office the way that they did prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So if we can find ways to create more office to residential conversions, that will also help us to create more housing.
Yeah, my understanding is that can be a very expensive proposition because there's a lot of things people don't take into account when you're trying to convert an office building into an apartment building. I mean, we just have to look in downtown Phoenix, that's happening, and that building's been under construction, it seems like, forever.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that all cities and towns, along with the state legislature, work together to find ways that we can actually make this process a lot more accessible and a lot more expensive.
All right.
A lot less expensive, I should say. Excuse me.
All right, Tempe Mayor Corey Woods, thank you very much for joining here. But up next, we'll be bringing in our panel to talk about all of this week's major headlines, including the push to put an immigration enforcement measure on the November ballot. That's next on Politics Unplugged. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. Time to look at the rest of this week's headlines with our panel, Democratic consultant Stacy Pearson and Daniel Scarpinato, the former chief of staff for Governor Ducey. Thanks both for being here. Let's start with the big picture of this story this week. Republicans advancing a bill to send a pretty harsh or strict measure to the ballot in the fall, and this would be described as one of the toughest immigration bills in the country. Thoughts on this?
Well, I think this is the top issue. It's actually issue 1, 2, and 3 among the voters. Abortion is also a big issue in the state, and economy is, but to a lesser degree than last cycle. I think all of that could change between now and November, but this is an issue that the voters are focused on. I think it makes sense for our elected officials to be focused on it. So I think it's a good policy. It was vetoed by the governor, and Arizonans will have the chance to decide on it themselves.
Yeah, and this is an issue, you brought that up. It was, part of this bill was vetoed by the governor earlier, and this is based on this Texas bill, Senate Bill 4, I believe, and it would make being in the country, in Arizona, illegally or crossing illegally into Arizona a state crime. That empowers local law enforcement to go ahead and enforce federal immigration laws. That's been ruled in the past as being unconstitutional. How do you think this affects the election if it does get to the ballot?
Look, Governor Hobbs vetoed that bill because it's bad policy, and there's no money for local law enforcement to enforce it. There is no way that our municipalities can cover the cost of federal immigration enforcement, nor do they even have enough staff. We're hundreds of cops short across the valley, and in full disclosure, I'm married to a cop. This isn't what they signed up for. This would be the equivalent of empowering park rangers to enforce federal immigration. Where is the money going to come from, and where are the folks that are going to do the enforcement going to come from, and then at what cost to our economy?
But voters clearly, I mean, they want something done with the border. You look at the numbers. You've seen near historic surges coming across the border. It's not just people coming from Mexico or Central America. They're coming from all over the world, and voters really want something done. Why not this?
Because this is not going to work. To squeeze this one area and make sure Phoenix PD is pulling 1070 2.0 is not going to stop the federal crisis. Senator Sinema negotiated a bipartisan bill that died in the House thanks to former President Trump. That's the level of investment that needs to happen. It is in big B, big T trillion dollars that needs to come from the federal government to solve the problem.
And what about some of the legal challenges? There's a thing called the single subject rule here in Arizona. You got to limit, and you can't just log roll and turn a ballot referral into some sort of legislative Christmas tree or policy Christmas tree, hanging a bunch of stuff in there. Given the fact that this deals with immigration, it also deals with fentanyl enforcement and some other things, could this be at risk of being struck down by the courts as violating the single subject law?
Well, I'm not a legal scholar, so I'll leave that up to them.
We can play one.
No, I think it will comply with single subject, but I think, look, this isn't the end-all be-all. This is not going to solve all of our border issues. We've been dealing with this for a couple decades, particularly in Arizona. It's now a national issue. But what I will say is that what Texas is doing and what Governor Abbott is doing in Texas is working. And the federal government isn't addressing this. I applaud Senator Sinema, but her bill didn't become law. Something needs to be done, and I don't see any solutions being brought forward. And I think at the end of the day, I don't think the governor wanted to veto this bill. I think she would have rather not to get this bill. And I think Democrats would rather not talk about this issue, this election cycle, and that's why they don't want the voters to decide on it.
Yeah. And speaking about not wanting to talk about the issue, a lot of people, critics have said, pundits have said that Republicans don't really want to talk about abortion issue. Was this a pivot away from the abortion policy we saw dominate the headlines here in Arizona the prior few weeks? Pivot away as quickly as possible. A week later, we're advancing this big-time border bill.
Well, I think this was something in the works prior to that. But all these issues are going to be on the table. I mean, I've said before, if you're running for office this cycle and you're a Republican, last cycle, everyone buried their heads in the sand on this abortion issue. You cannot do that. You need to be out there talking about what you're for and what you're not for and clearly articulating it. And this is also an issue. So Democrats may think they can ignore this, but these are the top issues. You need to be speaking to them, to the voters.
And how does this affect turnout? Obviously, it's an election year. You can't avoid that kinds of stuff. I mean, you're going to have abortion on the ballot, likely. That's going to turn out a lot of voters.
Right.
People suspect. What about this immigration? What draws more people to the polls here?
So if we know that an abortion issue draws out younger voters that certainly have no interest in arming local law enforcement to enforce federal immigration law. So I don't think this is a slam dunk. Assuming it gets on the ballot, that Arizona voters pass it. It's extraordinarily expensive, and I think there still is a cadre of non-tinfoil hat-wearing, sane Republicans who are worried about cost.
Well, what's the cost of doing nothing? And we have one study from the Common Sense Institute of Arizona that the fentanyl crisis alone in 2022 was costing the state $3 billion a year. So yes, we should invest in law enforcement to deal with this because there are other costs as a result. But I think this issue will start off at a high water mark, as will the abortion access measure. And that means that there are people in Arizona who are not tinfoil hat who believe in both. And so Democrats, if they're going to go out and demonize people who are supportive of border security, I think are setting themselves up for a lot of problems.
All right, I want to give Stacy the final word here.
Yeah, and no one's demonizing people that are supportive of border security. I certainly am, but we've got entire law enforcement organizations, municipal, that have fentanyl teams. I know this because my husband was on one. I mean, you've got street crimes units that spend their days. So fentanyl is just this scary word that the Republicans who crafted this legislation are using to to trick voters.
All right,
Let's
we're
let the
gonna have-
voters decide.
We're gonna have to leave it right there. We're out of time, unfortunately. Be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.